From the very start, the iPhone has been about bringing innovations that are really important in people's daily lives. And as a result, iPhone has changed the world. Introducing the iPhone 6s and the iPhone 6s Plus. We are driven to innovate at Apple. You've seen that all morning.
The iPhone 6s and 6s Plus launched in late 2015 and were seen as relatively small but important upgrades to the iPhone line. After all, they were an S iPhone model and followed the tradition of having the same design as the phone released prior, while improving on the internal specs, cameras, and overall performance. And the 6s did just that, bringing huge steps forward in nearly every category, including most essentially of all, that rose gold color. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and while I kid, it's true that for many reviewers and users around release, the 6s didn't actually seem to be much more than a simple minor refresh. The same thing as we saw in 2014, but with an S and a fancier camera. But the truth is, the 6s and 6s Plus were and always have been massive upgrades, completely blowing away the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus by any and every possible metric. The design and build was very durable, fixing that entire Bendgate fiasco. The camera went from 8 to 12 megapixels and brought 4K video recording. The A9 chipset was a huge jump from the A8, and it brought 2 GB of RAM versus only 1, ensuring the phone would age much better and remain a pleasant experience throughout its life. And what a life the 6s has had, especially compared to its predecessor. The 6 and 6 Plus, coming in 2014, were the best-selling smartphones of all time, but they actually weren't much of an upgrade over the iPhone 5s beyond the design and larger displays. Because of this, they only received support from iOS 8 to iOS 12, which is a solid 5 years, and they also got another 2 years of security updates, but the 5s from 2013 got from iOS 7 to also iOS 12, making for 6 years of support, which for the time was a record unmatched by any previous smartphone. But records are made to be broken, and the 6s would do just that, getting from iOS 9 in late 2015 all the way until iOS 15 in late 2022, making for a frankly ridiculous 7 years of software support. And assuming the pattern of security updates continue, it should even get a few more updates yearly until the end of 2024. As far as major iOS versions, however, it's done. It's dead, with iOS 16 only supporting the iPhone 8 and above. Yeah, the iPhone 8 and above, as the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus are also ending their lives on iOS 15, in spite of being a year newer and a good bit faster than the 6s. It's an odd decision on Apple's part, particularly because of the 5th generation iPad with the A9 chipset. That's the same chipset as in the iPhone 6s. That iPad is in fact getting iPadOS 16. But either way, for better or for worse, the iPhone 6s and 6s Plus are finally seeing their long lifespans come to an end in late 2022. So today we're going to give the phones a proper send-off, talking about their life, the death, and most importantly, the legacy. But first, we have a quick word from today's sponsor, Aura. Oh hey, how's it going? I was just signing into my bank accounts and don't want my private information stolen.
Foolish mortal, you look stupid.
Okay, harsh, but 33% of Americans have been victims of identity theft, and are you wearing my glasses?
I have bad eyes.
Is that my wallet?
No, it's mine. It just fell out of my pocket.
And my YouTube play button?
Look, you imprudent peasant, you got me. You need better online privacy.
Identity theft is not a joke, Cola.
And that's why you should be using Aura, the all-in-one digital security app that keeps you and your family safe online.
Oh, Aura, the amazing app that covers every aspect of digital security, allowing you to monitor essential vulnerabilities while still giving you an antivirus, VPN, and password manager to keep you safe online.
Yes.
Aura, where it's only $12 a month when paid annually, with a free trial and 60-day money-back guarantee, plus 24/7 support when you need it.
How do you know?
I told you, identity theft is not a joke, and the police are on their way.
Way too imbecile.
Aura notified me as soon as my privacy had been breached and my information popped up on the dark web. I'm afraid it's the end of the line for you, Cola.
Foolish mortal.
The only fools are the ones who don't use the top link in the description and sign up for Aura immediately to keep them and their family completely and fully safe online with the easiest to use all-in-one app. And jokes aside, checking it out does help out the channel a lot. I've been making a lot of these kind of bigger videos lately, and they're a lot of fun, but they're not particularly financially viable just because of how long they take, so sponsors like this are a huge help. Aura is just a great service. There's nothing more important than keeping ourselves safe online, and with Aura, you just get every aspect covered.
Feed me, I am hungry.
Okay, yeah, big thanks to Aura, and now back to the video.
While they may look familiar, we have changed everything about these new iPhones.
As always with these types of videos, just like the one I did on the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, me calling the iPhone 6S dead does not mean that it's in any way obsolete, bad, or even an unpleasant experience. In fact, on iOS 15 I've always found that it runs shockingly well. I wouldn't call it fast, but the performance is consistently smooth, and the overall experience feels akin to a relatively recent smartphone, certainly not one that's actually 7 years old. But for all accounts and purposes, the iPhone 6S is dead to Apple, with it no longer getting updates, putting an end to an era. It was the last iPhone with a headphone jack, or at least close to it, with the iPhone SE from early 2016 technically being the most recent. And I haven't forgotten about the first generation iPhone SE. That phone is worth talking about all on its own in a different video, so watch out for that. I really want to emphasize just how big a deal it is for a smartphone to get 7 full years of major software support. That's not just unprecedented or unheard of with iPhones or smartphones in general, that's kind of unheard of with the tech industry at large. It absolutely blows away the competition from 2015, with most of them only getting updates to 2017 or 2018 at best, which is laughably pitiful in comparison. In the iPhone 7 video I did, I compared that phone to a lot of phones that came out the same year. We're not even gonna bother doing that today because the 6S blows them away by such a long shot. Apple has their drawbacks, and iOS definitely has their drawbacks, but there's no question that when it comes to a user who plans to keep their phone for the long haul, an iPhone is the way to go. Of course, custom ROM support is an awesome thing, but that's a lot of trouble to go to. If Android manufacturers cared about their own phones even half as much as their modding communities do, users would be much better off. And if you really want to be blown away, the iPhone 6S isn't even the longest supported iOS device. That title actually belongs to the second generation iPad Air, which was released in late 2014 with the A8X chipset and is fully updatable to iPadOS 15. You also have the 4th generation iPad mini from 2015 with its A8 chip, the same as in the iPhone 6, and it's just as current as the Air 2 and iPhone 6S. It's extremely impressive, and those devices got their advantage over the iPhone 6 with their extra gigabyte of RAM, keeping them more capable in the long run. A big part of me wishes the 6S was getting iOS 16, just because 8 years would be even more ludicrous. But in reality, it's likely a good thing for Apple to end support sooner than later. If you remember the iPhone 4S on iOS 9, the first iPhone to get 5 years of iOS support, well, let's just say more updates isn't always a good thing, though the phone even running software that current was a bit of a technical marvel, and luckily the days of updates slowing down your device seem to be a thing of the past. Even so, it's a little odd the 6S isn't getting iOS 16 when the iPad equivalent, the iPad 5, is getting iPadOS 16. Perhaps Apple's doing it because the iPad 5 is only 5 years old, but that doesn't fully track, with the iPod Touch 7th generation from 2019 also not getting iOS 16 alongside the 6S and iPhone 7. The 7 not getting another update, to me, is the most confusing of all, but we've already talked about that in that other video, so there's no need to repeat the sentiment over and over.
These new iPhones are truly the most advanced iPhones we've ever created.
While the iPhone 6S might be ending its life only this year, putting it up beside the iPhone 13 Pro is quite the eye-opening experience. Had it not been for the same grid layout and iOS software, you wouldn't even know the same company made these two phones, at least without seeing the Apple logos on the back. The 6S and 6S Plus are the final phones of a completely different generation of Apple as a company, as the iPhone 7 represented the transition into the new era, leading to, of course, the iPhone 10 and beyond. And that iPhone 7 brought comparatively very little for a non-S iPhone upgrade, with a similar design to the 6 and 6S, and then a second telephoto camera lens on the Plus model. It's really fair to call the 7 the 6SS, and in fact it's easy to argue that the 6S would have made a better iPhone 7 itself than the 7 actually did. While it didn't change the design whatsoever from the iPhone 6, Apple wasn't kidding when they said their tagline, "The only thing that's changed is everything." Take for example one of the best changes, allowing you to get into your phone so much faster, second generation Touch ID. It made it so you had to barely even brush your thumb across the home button to unlock your phone, versus the much more intentional holds on the iPhone 6 and 5S. It sounds like a small thing, but it's one that makes for a really big quality of life improvement. The 6S really brought fast to a whole new level in every single way. The A9 chipset of course blew the A8 out of the water, with Apple claiming it offered 70% better CPU performance and 90% better GPU performance than what they had in the iPhone 6. Now Apple loves to throw out these numbers every single year, so it's easy to kind of ignore them, but it's just one of many steps they've made leading up to the M1 and M2 taking the computer industry by storm. And it's also just a good chipset. It's been around for so long, and it's in the iPad 5th generation, which is getting iPadOS 16, meaning it's getting at least 8 years of support. And who knows, if the iPad 5 somehow gets iPadOS 17, the A9 could even get 9 years. It's kind of ludicrous at this point, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility given the insane precedents Apple's established. And with the 6S specifically, 2 gigs of RAM really did help get more performance over the iPhone 6. It seems like a small number now, and it probably did as well in 2015 to many an Android user, but because Apple makes their own software specifically for their own iPhones, they're able to hone the memory management to a T and push out a lot more efficiency. So it's as fast, if not faster, even if the raw numbers aren't as high. And the 6S is a great example of that effectiveness, just given how strong it's remained over its lifespan. Here's something interesting I actually didn't know until I was looking into this. The iPhone 6S and 6S Plus were the first ever smartphones to utilize NVMe, the high-end flash storage that's still used in iPhones today, along with the vast majority of mid to high-end computers being made. Androids have their own system in UFS, and it's not worth getting into, but NVMe was a big upgrade and no doubt made for yet another big difference in the longevity of the 6S. And here's another interesting fact. The iPhone 6S has just as many megapixels as the iPhone 13 Pro, in spite of it coming out 6 years prior. Now this is due to a number of factors, and the 13 Pro does still have 3 camera lenses instead of just 1, and of course the quality is significantly better, but it still goes to show that in the very least the 6S isn't completely blown away by the modern amenities we have today. And really that's the thing, the iPhone 6S now at the very tail end of its life, as I'll be posting this video maybe a week before the iPhone 14 announcement, as of today, it's genuinely not a bad smartphone or painful experience, at least generally speaking. This rose gold iPhone 6S is 16 gigs, so it's a bit of a pain, but beyond that, it's a reasonably usable phone, and it's fully updatable. With the launch of iOS 16, the 6S might be dead by the arbitrary clickbait definition I've prescribed to it, but I guarantee there will be millions of users out there still using the 6S in the next few years to come, and actually if it's anything like the past iPhones, it'll probably be like 15 years from now and someone will still be using the 6S. Ultimately, I'm pretty thrilled with how the iPhone 6S is ending its life. It's had a fantastic record-breaking run, and it's of a privileged few long-supported smartphones to never actually feel slow on their final version of software. From iOS 9 to iOS 15, the 6S has stayed a strong performer throughout, assuming you have a model with decent battery health that hasn't gotten bogged down over the years. If it has, a restore might help, but if you're one of the unlucky owners like me to be using a 16GB iPhone 6S, you're probably not having a good time. Luckily, Apple did stop selling this model following the release of the iPhone 7, making 32 gigs the standard minimum, but I digress. This is not a review of the 6S, it's supposed to be about the life and legacy, so let's talk about just that. And to fully understand how important this smartphone was, we need to go back a year before it even came out with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, the phones that would become the best-selling smartphones of all time by a long shot.
The original iPhone set the bar for which the category would forever be defined. And for every iPhone that followed, we built on the vision, but pushed further and enlarged what the iPhone could be. Today, we are launching the biggest advancement in the history of iPhones. And I hope you'll agree they're the best phones you have ever seen.
The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus were a big deal when they were announced in late 2014, and for good reason. They were the first iPhones to break the well-established Steve Jobs era convention of solely having smartphones small enough to be used with one hand. It was a philosophy Jobs subscribed to, but it is unfair to say that Apple shifting from it somehow makes him look wrong in hindsight, or they were wrong for doing so. It's just the way the industry was going, and for what was one of the first times in the young lives of smartphones, it was Androids paving the path forward by bringing in bigger phones. When Jobs passed in 2011, most Android competition were still hardly bigger than iPhone, and the display qualities left a lot to be desired compared to the gorgeous 3.5-inch high pixel density Retina screen. Even with that, Jobs would have had input on the slightly larger 2012 iPhone 5, no doubt approving the taller display, which went to a 16:9 ratio, making it feel sleeker and larger, even if it was still a relatively small 4 inches diagonally. But Samsung in particular was really jumping ahead in the following years, going from 4.3 inches in the Galaxy S2 to suddenly 4.8 and then 5 inches with the S3 and S4. That doesn't sound too different, but you can't forget about their bigger siblings, the Note series. The first Note came out around the launch of the iPhone 4S, and it had a 5.3-inch screen, and then you had 5.5, 5.7. This is a Galaxy Note 4, but it's the same size as the 2013 Note 3. So you had 3 years of phones significantly larger than iPhones, while still having smaller options that were also bigger than iPhones. I know this is supposed to be about the 6S, and we're getting there, but it's important to establish the context leading up to its release. The Galaxy series really paved the path for bigger phones, and with other Androids following suit, it left Apple users stuck with what were significantly smaller devices in a world where people were spending more and more time on their smartphone every day. It wasn't just for browsing the web anymore, it was for consuming video, playing games. The shift from only 2011 to 2013 in smartphone tech, and really just how society was using smartphones in general, was absolutely massive, and Apple would be left behind if they didn't do something quickly. And so they did, albeit a bit slower than what people wanted. Not that it drastically hurt them in the long run. Ultimately, their 2014 iPhones would be absurdly successful. The iPhone 6 and 6 Plus finally launched with much larger 4.7 and 5.5-inch displays, the same as on the 6S and 6S Plus. And so for Apple users who had watched their friends and family use phablets for the past couple of years, the iPhone 6 was a much needed upgrade. It was bigger and better, doing everything the 5S did and more. Somewhat. Turns out, technically speaking, the iPhone 6 wasn't as massive of an upgrade over the iPhone 5S as we might remember, but this is mainly due to the 5S being such a significant jump in processing power with the first 64-bit chipset ever in a smartphone with the A7. The iPhone 6 had the basic list of upgrades to be sure, but it was the size that really sold people on the phone, and sold them it did, selling well over 220 million units. And it makes sense, it was a time when smartphone adoption rates were extraordinarily high, and the initial waves of smartphone owners from between 2008 to 2012 were probably ready for a solid upgrade, especially as phones were getting bigger. But there was a problem, and it was a big one. The iPhone 6 was thin and light, like ridiculously so, to the point that to today it's still the thinnest iPhone ever made. Yeah, so Bendgate happened. I'm sure we all remember this, but basically, if you had tight pants and no smartphone case, or too much pressure was put on the 6, or especially the 6 Plus given how large it was, the phone with its weak aluminum chassis would bend much too easily under the pressure. It was an embarrassing issue, and one that never ever should have gotten past quality control. But Johnny Ive's never-ending quest to make smartphones thinner than paper ultimately had taken precedence. Lots of context here, but it lays the foundation for why exactly the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus were such amazing smartphones. You've heard why the iPhone 6 was a, forgive me for using this word over and over, but big deal. And so then the 6S and 6S Plus took all that, and not only would they fix the issues of their predecessor, but they made every aspect of the device better, not to mention adding an extremely revolutionary and painfully underutilized feature in 3D Touch, which we'll get to later on.
These new iPhones are absolutely beautiful. This is the brand new rose gold aluminum finish. And while it may look the same, this is an entirely new aluminum.
If you take an iPhone 6S and an iPhone 6 and stack them on top of each other, well, honestly, you can't really tell from this clip, but if you do it in person, the 6S is noticeably thicker and heavier in the hand. Mind you, it's still insanely light and thin compared to the modern iPhone, as they have become absolute units, but believe it or not, it's been thinner. And so it was such a simple fix of making the phone just slightly chunkier, barely at all compromising the form factor in the first place, and then bending wasn't an issue all of a sudden. It shows where early Tim Cook Apple tended to focus things. You can blame Johnny Ive or whoever, but it's not like it was just one person, and there's no questioning, priorities were out of order. And then nowadays you kind of have the opposite. Instead of getting thinner and thinner, iPhones have been getting thicker and thicker, and whether you love or hate that, you get better battery life, the phone's a bit heavier, it can all be traced back to the iPhone 6S with its 7000 series aluminum alloy. The strength needed to prevent bending and, more importantly, touch disease. And actually, that's worth mentioning too, the iPhone 6 wasn't just prone to bending, it also, in large part due to the bending, had issues with the touch display not working. So it wasn't purely an aesthetic annoyance. While it's hard not to say Bendgate was a bit exaggerated just by nature of how the tech community and media tends to react when Apple does anything wrong, I would say the fairly manufactured outrage was justified in origin, and they've had repair programs. Ultimately, it never should have happened. The 6S is really what the iPhone 6 should have been. But I digress. When it comes to aesthetics, the iPhone 6 and 6S designs were pretty well loved back in the day, seen as is premium, classy, what you would expect from an iPhone. But in more recent years, perhaps from burnout caused from having so many similar iterations of this design, I've noticed the tech and Apple community especially seemingly shift their opinion. And I actually include myself in that, having once thought this was a fantastic design. And it's not as if I hate it, it's certainly solid. In fact, it's the best thing about the 6S is that it's extraordinarily solid and practical, but put emphasis on extraordinary. Looking back at around 2015, a lot of smartphones were beginning to look the same, and with iPhones having gotten bigger and more standardized, they no longer stood out from the crowd quite the same way they used to. What I especially don't like from this era is the plastic antenna bands running across the back. It was a bit of a carryover from the iPhone 5 design, but that phone was miles more premium, incorporating glass in a way that just felt right. The plastic isn't necessarily a problem here, but Apple putting it on full display I quite dislike in hindsight. And to be fair, they would change it with their next redesign in the iPhone 7, even if that phone looks identical from the front. And that's where the solid aspect comes into play here, as the front of the iPhone 6, 6S, 7, 8, 2020, and 2022 SE all look exactly the same. This has, when it came out, the fastest smartphone chipset on the market, the A15, and it looks from the front the exact same as an 8-year-old smartphone. And I believe this might be in part why the iPhone 6 line feels a bit boring in hindsight, simply because we've seen it now so many times and it's been done so much better. I think most would agree that the iPhone 7 and iPhone 8 redesigns looked a lot cleaner than the 6 and 6S do, and perhaps now it's even better with the centered Apple logo if you're a fan of that, but either way it leaves the 2014 and 2015 smartphones at the bottom when it comes to the totem pole of contemporary home button iPhones. But hey, the 6S did bring that rose gold color, can't forget about that, along with the same gold, silver, and space gray we saw on the iPhone 6. Here's something you might not have realized: the iPhone 6S is the last iPhone to have the S badge on the back, in spite of the iPhone XS coming out 3 years later. The SE also had that SE badge, but yeah, this is why you watch me, right? To learn, you're welcome. The iPhone 6S was the iPhone 6 done right. It fixed all the bend gate issues, and it brought massive improvements that, frankly, were a bit bigger than we usually see in S upgrades. But the jump in camera quality is worth mentioning as well. It really improved the user experience, going to 12 megapixels, and you were able to film 4K video. I myself, actually, using an iPhone 6S back in the day, did a lot of my early filming for YouTube with my 6S in 4K 30.
I now have an iPhone 6S, but when I did this, I still had my iPhone 6.
And frankly, I mean, the quality's not great or anything, but it's not that bad either. It's insane that even half-decent video can come out of a phone that's 7 years old. Live photos were also introduced this year with the iPhone 6S, which not everyone likes or particularly uses, but I enjoy it, especially having a dog who there's a lot of movement. But altogether, the camera was a huge improvement, and especially on the front of the phone with this selfie camera. The iPhone 6 had a terrible selfie camera at only 1.2 megapixels. The 6S had 5. The 6S itself wasn't amazing, but it was a lot better. Again, this is not a review, but we're talking about the life aspect of the 6S. And what I want to push is that the user experience for this phone has been really solid. It was solid when it launched, and it's still usable today. That is an accomplishment not a lot of tech products can claim, whether it's a smartphone or even a computer. How many laptops from 7 years ago are even half usable today? In terms of straight up new features the 6S brought, the list might feel pretty short. But as established, this is less so because it was somehow a small upgrade, but instead simply a massive improvement on every aspect of what Apple had previously built. 3D Touch was a huge innovation, even if it was ultimately underutilized, but I really want to talk about it. So we're going to take this opportunity to transition into talking about what the iPhone 6S is leaving behind. We've covered its death on iOS 15, its life and the enhancing of the iPhone 6 experience, and we've got one more main chapter: the legacy of the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus, and the part they've played in shaping the smartphone industry moving forward.
Multi-touch has changed how we interact with our devices. So our team's been hard at work trying to imagine how you take multi-touch to the next generation, and they've really done it. This is unlike any experience you've ever seen in a smartphone.
3D Touch on its own was, in my opinion, one of the greatest innovations Apple's ever made in the iPhone line. It had an absurd amount of potential when it hit the 6S, and it's an absolute travesty Apple ended up ignoring it and killing it off 4 years later the way they did. iOS 9 brought very limited functionality, but it was easily excusable given that it was brand new, and some of the features on the surface seemed genuinely useful. What was 3D Touch? Well, 3D Touch was an interesting interesting piece of tech, and it allowed for interaction in a way that had never been possible before on an iPhone, where the display could actually tell how much pressure you were putting on the screen with your finger, physical pressure. So there was an actual difference between a light tap and a hard tap. Doing this on an app on the home screen would give you access to some new options, giving you some shortcuts into apps. Now this has been replicated since the iPhone XR. Apple's been doing this without 3D touch. All you do is just hold on to the app, but you can actually see it here. It is still a little faster than the regular haptic touch, as they call it, but there's a lot more to 3D touch. You can access the multitasker by pushing the side of the display. People forget about that one. One of my favorite things about it is on the keyboard, you can access the cursor by just pushing anywhere on the keyboard. It took me forever to get used to holding down the spacebar instead of just pushing anywhere. There was the peek and pop feature, and even the mobile gaming potential was hyped up significantly in the September 2015 event. It was a whole nother way to receive input on the device without physically increasing the size or adding buttons. It was a brilliant innovation, and one that, while somewhat replicated in minor ways by competitors over the years, was never ever fully matched. And in all fairness, Force Touch to some extent does live on with capacitive home buttons on the iPhone 7 and newer, including the 2022 iPhone SE. In fact, the 6S was the final iPhone to have a home button that physically clicked in, versus on newer iPhones where it simply recognizes the pressure on the home button and reacts accordingly by bringing you home and mimicking a click with that oh so satisfying haptic feedback. And haptics, that's one spot where the 6S massively improved the iPhone line, actually thrusting the iPhone way ahead of the competition for years when it came to the simple matter of your phone vibrating. The iPhone 7 with its haptic engine got even better, but the 6S is a huge difference over the iPhone 6. The Apple Watch, which was very new at the time, featured Force Touch. It was an interesting period of time where Apple seemed to believe 3D Touch was the wave of the future, and they were fully invested into moving forward with it and making it a key part of all their devices. And while it lasted for years, sadly the writing was on the wall when the iPhone XR didn't have it in 2018, followed by the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro in 2019 also not having it, making the iPhone XS and XS Max the final devices to ever utilize the feature. There are of course benefits to getting rid of it, given that Apple barely used it and replicated all its uses anyways without 3D Touch. It does make more room for a bigger battery, and so I can appreciate that. Even so, it's a bit sad to see one of the most innovative features Apple's ever brought to iPhone fall away so quickly, especially considering just how unique it was. There was just nothing else like it on any smartphone. Apple really hyped it up in 2015 for good reason, but then they just never really did anything with it. It's a pity. And while 3D Touch was talked about quite a bit at the launch, ultimately it wouldn't be one of the key headlining features moving forward. The true quality of life benefits came in the significantly more durable build and design with the new series of aluminum. 3D Touch is a legacy feature, and so is that old headphone jack. Yes, the glorious, beautiful headphone jack, something we didn't consider a feature at the time, but only a year later it would become much coveted as Apple opted to scrap it in the name of courage, more realistically in order to sell AirPods. Something interesting with the 6S is that it's considered to some extent water resistant. Not officially, and Apple never mentioned it or gave it an official rating, but it's the first iPhone to have the display adhesively stuck to the body, keeping the internals much safer from a quick splash of water or dip in the toilet. And while technically the 6S doesn't guarantee anything, it's a lot better than any previous iPhone before it, although it makes it a pain to open up if you need to fix something. What you're seeing right now is going to hopefully be explained in a future video, by the way. It's a long story, basic battery swap, but anyways. It could potentially be argued that Apple not going all in on water resistance in 2015 was due to them wanting to use it as a partial excuse for removing the headphone jack the next year, even though many other competitors would have headphone jacks and be water resistant for years onwards. But I digress, it doesn't really matter when it comes to the 6S and 6S Plus, and it's tough to complain with these two phones. And honestly, that really summarizes the 6S to a T. It's hard to complain, because it fixed so much of everything that Apple had previously done wrong, along with bringing in some cool new features that in the very least would act as a selling point for the years to come. It didn't exactly take the world by storm like the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus did, but it didn't need to, and by virtue of being an Apple iPhone that outdid the previous year's extremely popular Apple iPhone in hardware and specs, it would sell extraordinarily well for the years it was sold by Apple, all the way until it was discontinued at the 2018 announcement of the iPhone XR and XS. In fact, the 6S actually is the second best-selling smartphone of all time, with about 175 million units sold, which is just ridiculous. I'm just about finished here, and it's about 2 a.m., so we're gonna wrap things up. But honestly, there's a lot more I could talk about. We could dedicate more time on what is now a dead feature in 3D Touch, but it's hard to justify it because it is a dead feature. But 3D Touch does represent something major to me, a rare example of Apple experimenting and actually doing something new that no other manufacturer had ever tried before them. iPhones are infamous for for bringing features your run-of-the-mill Samsung had brought years prior, and then making a huge deal of it. See water resistance, wireless charging, OLED panels, and so on and so forth. But Apple tends to wait for a reason. They won't bring in something new, even if it's fairly well established, unless they believe they can perfect it. In some cases, it seems like an arbitrary excuse, like with water resistance. Like, oh, Apple waited to bring it in because they wanted to perfect water resistance. Yeah, right. But keep in mind, as we've said, the 6S is actually somewhat water resistant with the adhesive sealing, and Apple didn't even advertise this. No doubt because it didn't live up to the standard they'd want for an official water resistant feature, along with possibly that headphone jack excuse mentioned and wanting to have an actual feature for the iPhone 7 because it didn't have a ton besides the telephoto lens. But either way, if the 6S could hold up to some sort of standard for water resistance, or they put a little more time into it to make it hold up, that's something any other smartphone maker totally would have taken advantage of in marketing. How many times have you seen in photos or commercials a smartphone with water drops on it, or being splashed, or something to that effect? It looks cool, and it tells the user that it's a durable device. What company other than Apple would ever purposely not take advantage of marketing that way? But that's where Apple is just Apple, having such a monumental brand presence that their mere existence ensures successful sales, regardless of what the product is or what it does, at least unless it's called AirPower, in which case they will cancel it and pretend it never existed. No company but Apple could sell you this phone one year and then this phone the next and say that everything's changed, and have you genuinely believe them. And while there's always skepticism in reviews and with critics, the truth was Apple wasn't even lying here. The 6S did change everything. It was a big improvement over the 6. Maybe it was what the 6 should have been, but what it set into motion has carried over throughout every new iPhone that's come out since. The technological jumps in processing power boosted them far ahead of the competition. The camera was beginning to get more and more impressive. You had the bettering of biometrics. Of course, now we have Face ID, but second-gen Touch ID was a huge improvement. Even unironically, the rose gold color set the precedent for Apple to begin being a little more creative and trying new colors here and there instead of just having the same dull black, white, and gold year after year. The iPhone upgrade program was started this year, something that still continues today. We mentioned live photos. iCloud received upgrades to photo storage. And at the end of the day, the 6S was just a great phone. It's still really not that bad, and maybe it's not going to be supported on iOS any longer, but I don't think we're going to forget about it anytime soon. Just for a little more perspective here, the iPhone 6S came out in 2015. 2 months later, after it came out, the final flagship Windows phone came out, the Lumia 950 and 950 XL. Is that not mind-boggling to you? The longevity of Apple's devices at this point is ridiculous. It's ludicrous. There's no words to even describe it. The iPhone 7 not getting iOS 16 is a bit odd, and I'm not necessarily disappointed because 6 years of support is still really good. But I do hope that Apple continues the trend of supporting their old devices for so long, because there's nothing that drives customer loyalty quite like knowing that your phone could last you over 5 years and still be pretty usable. That's impressive. Congrats, Apple. You did good with this one.
Our goal is to make products we are proud to sell and would recommend to our family and friends. We want to do that at the lowest prices we can. But I have to tell you, there's some stuff in our industry that we wouldn't be proud to ship, that we wouldn't be proud to recommend to our family and friends. And we can't do it. We just can't ship junk.
And with that, I think we're right about done here. And I'm still wearing my getup from the ad earlier. But speaking of which, you definitely should go check out Aura. It's the best all-in-one security app out there for you and your family to stay safe online and keep your privacy private. Top link in the description, and huge thanks again to Aura for making this video possible. I do really like making these long-form videos. Hopefully uploads will be a bit more frequent now as we finish up this mini-series. I still got to do the iPhone SE, but you've got the iPhone launch, so we'll see what happens for the timeline there. And there was that big AirPower video I did recently, if you haven't seen it, by the way. I've been super overwhelmed lately by your guys' support. It's been a big help. Would not be able to do these long form videos if not for that. Very much appreciate y'all sticking around, and if you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. You can follow my socials at 91_tech, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We do have a great Discord community linked in the description. Hope to see you there. But that being said, I'm Josh from 91 Tech. This is Cola from 91 Tech, and we will see you all next time.